I wish you mountains that stoop down and crumble the tufts of hair on their crown, to create beach sand for shores that this world will not stumble into and dare to pollute, where the music of ancient flutes is trapped in the shells that populate its blanket of pebbles and stones, which when thrown against the surface of the ocean, with each bouncing motion whistle back the secrets of the snails that died inside them, carrying hell on their backs and heaven inside their hearts. Those who are said to have slowed down deliberately and sacrifice themselves so their shells are the homes to the songs and melodies that guide the bruised hips of lost sheep back home. My son, I want you to speak bright words the way light was named, with sound in attendance. And that I live long enough to tell you the story of how light and sound came to dance together for the first time, trapping the universe in a trillion light years of rhythm. My son, I wish that when you speak your name, you believe it. That each letter inside it is a feather inside the largest wing ever to host the wind. And that when you fly, you are not distracted fighting that wind, but that you are enjoying the aerial view. My son, I want to take all the insults of this world on your behalf, so that you find half of the world's untruths about black boys dead in a bunker somewhere. I would have gone back and forth into time and pick each and every falsehood, trap it in the underworld, and hope that you are reminded that I'm not banning a single one, but waiting to remind you that one day another generation will need you to take the other half. Make sure the collection is complete. Then have a bonfire and invite the neighbors, all singing together, screaming, "Fuck a racist." My son, I want your teenage eyes to take long walks down the hallways of histories begging to be written. And that those that died gritting their teeth, holding on to olive branches, can see you plant trees and be proud. And that seeing your hunger to know more disarms and charms their spirits into forgiving the trees from which the spears that dug into their chests were carved. My son, I wish you the rarest form of love, the one that plays catch with itself, throwing boomerang kisses at the sky, knowing that the love will come back glowing with remnants of dying stars, and that each single sparkle of those dying stars finds its way back into the sky and becomes a fully blown sun. My son, I want you to know that the hourglass is just a desert of seconds, ticking away until you're brave enough to shatter that glass and find water. Because that's what I wish for you, my son. I wish your water to flow into the future like hip-hop, like poetry. My son, I wish you an elephant's memory so that you remember to forget what they did to me. Write that date to ancestry. But more than anything, my son, I wish you to remember that you are royalty. Bayete, Zumkonto, Kabatela, Mzilankata, Mpangazita.
See, those who never wanted to see if life was greener on the other side of the water, or if they could ever make it back to the beach. History wiped again, a clean slate for the white man again. My grandparents masked their pain in silence, so we never get to speak of the evil their eyes saw as kids. Accepting defeat, protesting reprieve, this pain will never see a release. How do you forget you're looked upon as less because of the color of your skin? Because it wasn't long ago your kin were taken for keeps by savages ravaging towns and cities looking for gold mines and riches. And then you wonder why my brothers and sisters won't step on a boat. It's ancestors and ancestors who never made it back home. It still hurts when I think the bottom of the ocean is ravaged with their bones. When I stand on the edge of the Atlantic, the dead call to me. The whispers of the tortured and the drowned. I see them in my dreams and hear them in my sleep. Our connection to our ancestry is something you can't downplay. History can be faked, but they're feelings you can't erase. So when we tell the stories, they aren't just folklores or fictitious wordplay. The history books tell me the West developed Africa, but I think of the black people abroad, descendants of slaves cast as half worthy of countries built on the backs of their ancestors. I think of my kin at home still fighting for an identity, lost in between the remaining bits of our culture and the impositions of foreigners. I think of the children who have to bruise their fingertips digging into the earth in search of diamonds they're forced to exchange for pennies from capitalist savages. I think of the thousands of antiquities hanging in the hallways of fucking British museums. I think of all the parts of us lost in the ashes, all the parts of us buried between what's lost and what we're still trying to find, belonging neither here nor there. I think of how did our existence become a sacrilege, something to be wiped out of existence. I ask myself, who took the first shot? Did they ever imagine we'd ever be free? Or are we even really free? I just want to see us fucking celebrate ourselves because we're amazing. We're continuing to break bounds in societies that don't necessarily completely accept us, if you know what I mean. So this one is for myself and ode to myself and every black artist here today. Okay. I'm the artist you think I am and more. I've been a slave to the craft since it found me lighting up stages and burning down stereotypes. I was made for this. So when you see me coming, no, I'm not moving alone. The ancestors have lit my way, so I'm not afraid of the ghost. I might be the poet with the most, but I haven't reached my potential, so watch me continue to grow. I can't deny the energy that flows through me. Sometimes it eats me up from the inside till I put it to prose. The calling isn't an option. I heard it in my sleep and I rose. So when you hear my poetry, know it's forged from trauma and broken bones, fire and blood, because I'm one with the source. I'm the one with the sauce cooking poetry like four. I mean, how else can I show you I'm a god? My destination has been set in mind, like a killer towards its prey, a prey towards its creator. My precision is unmatched. And I know deep down playing ground field would never be enough for me. I'd be a fool to rubble in the dirt and pretend I'm not royalty. I am audacious, but a dreamer. I'm a pessimist, but a believer. I move with ease, but I'm headed for the top of the tower. My destiny was written at creation and handed to me on a platter. So when you see me, say my motherfucking name, Bumi Africa.
He did such amazing work. He has done incredible work all across North America, but these two monuments in particular are among his most beautiful. Ed Dwight, as many of you know, was an astronaut, engineer, so many things before he came to sculpture as his full-time vocation. Always interested in the arts, of course. But what he has created on these two sides of the Detroit River, we really must pause to appreciate from time to time. On the Detroit Monument, the gateway to freedom, we see freedom seekers approaching the shore of the Detroit River, some with joy, some with expectation, some with trepidation. And a real-life person, Georges de Baptiste, is represented there, pointing the way to Canada so that they can find their freedom. Knowing that legal freedom was available to people when they crossed the border after the abolition of slavery here, we recognize that they still had to fight for every subsequent right, all the rights that we now enjoy. And of course, we have this monument these wonderful figures, one lifting his hands up in joy and relief and gratitude, a woman uncertain of the future being greeted by another woman as she holds her baby in her arms. We recognize how much bravery was required of these individuals to make these long and arduous and dangerous, life-threatening journeys, to be here, to plant themselves here, to keep their families intact, to have legal freedom, to own property, to profit from their own labors, to be part of society. All of these things they welcomed, and we are so grateful that the ancestors made those journeys. At this point, I'm going to introduce our vocalist for today, the amazing Florine Dimubandi, a daughter of a Burundese Canadian family who is very well loved among people who love live music and theater in this city, in this community. And I want to say before she comes forward, on the day of the dedication, October 20th, 2001, as we all gathered in Hart Plaza, we heard the amazing and without equal Aretha Franklin singing Amazing Grace to all of us that morning. So it is my great joy that we will hear from Florine today with song.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining like the sun. When we've last days to sing God's praise, than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Was blind, but now I see.
To inform, on the western face of the monument, you'll find some information about key settlements, not all settlements, but key settlements that were established by people of African descent on this side of the border once they crossed over into freedom. And on the east facing section of the monument, you'll find a list of some of the luminaries, heroes of the Underground Railroad movement. And I particularly encourage you to take a look at those names if you have not been to the monument before, or refresh your memory if you have not seen it lately, and just pause and reflect on the contributions of all of those individuals. And Google them if necessary. These are all names that we should know and should remember. It is my great joy to introduce our next performer. TJ Travis has so many things in his bio. We could go on for a long time talking about TJ Travis, but chiefly TJ Travis has for a long time been a great leader among poets and storytellers and musicians and creatives in this community. He is currently the City of Windsor's multicultural storyteller, part of the official Poet Laureate program here, and of course is the Executive Director of ArtSite Windsor. And I'm so pleased to say that he is here representing not only himself and his own tremendous gifts, but the great community of Afro-Indigenous creatives that are part of this community. So I'm so pleased to welcome TJ Travis.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction.
Go TJ!
like so many of us out here today, we can speak a lot about what this monument represents, but so many of us, like that story, like we are that story. We're the physical manifestation of what that is. And we're the lineage of that line. Metaphoric clues, see shoes, coppin' street blues, confused, jazz corner, poppin' street reviews, crushed tunes, shaking like a bird, wings bruised, cash talk, pillow talk, heard it through the street news. I use, she use, hide life, peace crew, Jesus walks, Buddha talks, metaphysic in tune. You cry, we cry when we see that blood moon. Grandmother up in smoke, burn a bowl, smudge fumes. Ancestors come to me, teach me how to walk in peace. Clan love, tribal speak, heard it in the city streets. Hash cast, talking trees, planting seeds inside of me. Hip hop, poetry, spoken word with melody. The rhythm got a hold of me. Drumming is my destiny. Grandmother cured me of my mind, now she guided me. Black red dynasty, thought to be mythology. Science and technology, we are the pulse of all you see. All you think and all you do. Astrology is nothing new. Big bang, stars and moon, the universe inside of you. Create and multiply, looking through your mind's eye. If all you see is sea and sky, your chakras need to realign. Refine your frame of mind. You grounded, but you need to fly. Shed your skin, spread your wings, clean your mind. Decolonize, decolonize, decolonize. Martin Malcolm Huey showed the world how to do it. Now the world has to do it. Be a united unit. Martin Malcolm Huey showed the world how to do it. Now the world has to do it. Be a united unit. Be a united unit. Be a united unit. I hid a poem between the pages of an old book. Tucked between the lines of a Marvin Gaye hook, I was inspired to take a fresh look at what I thought was a crumbling hood. What's going on? What's going on? I taper my eyes to convalesce my perception, recollecting late nights on my childhood stoop. A dime bag of trees where blunt paper shoots. Whiskey and water with earth, wind, and fire ringing in my ears. Reflecting on the reasons that we're here. See, I carry no worries about tomorrow. No time to give, no time to borrow, no time to bank in a rubber band bundle. We chipped away stone to expose the 10 commandments of struggle. We sculpted the streets with the precision of Michelangelo. Rattling the bird cages with Maya Angelou's flow. We move so slow, we root like trees. Purple hazed in our words, we turn the whole hood green. And this is not a dream, see? Astro-indigenous kids from the hood, misunderstood and underestimated. Box braids and shades, celestially activated. Wrapped wise in the guise of a holy trinity. See, we were 13, going on infinity. Intoxicated on moonlight, stardust, the illusion of gravity. A prodigy in the 33rd degree, hiding secret stories in my poems using masonry. Count every third letter and every third word and learn the supreme mathematics of the galaxy and how it relates and equates to the omega root of everything. Godspeed in the twinkle of a vacuum. The wordplay will grab you, twist you into self-suspicion and then save you. ISIS upon a cross. Absurd. Reciting revolutionary ballads never heard. They slurred the truest bars before they withdrew. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. That's what I recollect from my childhood stoop. My face, young with heaven, bright with constellations. Life slowly moving with the vinyl groove of Bob Marley's tongue, gallantly singing redemption song to the black grief of Canada's Africville. Marcus Garvey's swan song. My future waving as a flag from a vanishing ghost ship, swallowed by the thirsty lips of the Atlantic. Humanity is manic with two-way static. We're divine, but we're not. We're enlightened when we panic. The truth about us is we're not quite organic. We're much like the tools and the thoughts of the head of a mechanic, preparing the world for an emergency landing. See, we're sleeping, not overstanding. Parading our teeth like a pack of wolves. Eating the dreams of gentle souls no older than the sun. Solar waves upon the face of a Gatling gun. And I'm busting atomic bodies on the belly of the universe. I'm pulling the strings of Artemis' purse, the goddess of hunt, nature, and birth. And I'm burning the library. From inside of my head, I'm resurrecting Christ from a white loaf of bread. I'm feeding the infection with a conspiracy blend of Egyptian sand, holding time in the lines inside of my hands. I'm hustling truth in the street like it's hot contraband. We are 13, going on infinity. See, I hold the entirety of your variety inside of me. I twist poetic verse to reverse the language of mediocrity. I slam unrehearsed the scrolls of Socrates. I fold infinity times infinity times infinity times infinity times infinity into an isosceles. I give my genius away for free. It helps me to sleep upon the spikes of my poverty mattress. Because I can see through the abuse with my poverty glasses. And I'll piece back together Pangea with the scraps of an atlas. So at last, I've abandoned my mind. Like a YouTube guru, I'm a self-parody of a Buddha shrine, an expanded notion of the absurd. I'm intellectually endowed, but I'm socially unlearned. I'm a cobblestone nerd peeking through the drapes of manifest destiny. But we were 13, going on infinity. And they were 13, going on infinity. 13. Thank you all so much.
To return to the United States to help liberate others or to seek reconciliation and reunification with their loved ones despite the dangers. And one such person is named on the eastern face of this monument. Osborne Perry Anderson is just one example of the many people of African descent who left Canada before it was really safe to do so and went back to the United States. He, in fact, joined John Brown on his raid of Harper's Ferry, leaving the relative safety of Chatham, where he was living, and ultimately became someone who was enlisted in the U.S. Civil War, fighting for the Union Army. And on the back of this monument, you'll find the other figure. If you've not been to this monument before, do go around and take a look. The other figure on the back of this monument is a young girl, perhaps 13 going on infinity, who is facing the Detroit River, looking back at America, pondering her eventual return, and she represents the many people of African descent who did leave Canada and make their way there. But many of us still remain, and we are rooted here, and they cannot dig us out, for sure. So I'm so pleased to introduce someone who is also an outstanding poet. Our special guest today is Michael Fraser. He is published in various national and international journals and anthologies. He has published in Best Canadian Poetry in English 2013 and 2018. Michael Fraser has won numerous awards, including Free Fall Magazine's 2014 and 2015 poetry contests, the 2016 CBC Poetry Prize, and the 2018 Gwendolyn McEwen Poetry Competition. His latest book, published by Biblioasis this year, is The Daybreakers, a poetry collection that I find just astonishing because through verse, it provides to us just a glimpse of the experiences of people who left Canada, people of African descent who left Canada to join in the U.S. Civil War effort. Remarkable poems, and I want to encourage you to check out the book sales table over with Biblioasis. Hi, Dave from Biblioasis. And to pick up a book and to ask Michael to sign it after the formal program. So please welcome Michael Fraser. This project, how did you get involved in this project?
Oh, wow. That's a wonderful question. I've always been interested in war. Even as a child, they used to have these black and white series on World War II. And I just recently learned it's on YouTube now, of course in color. And obviously interested in the Civil War specifically because it was considered essentially the first modern war. So you have ironclad ships, you have essentially the first machine guns, you have aerial reconnaissance, you have the first submarines, and of course the liberation of black people in the States. One thing that really got me into it was the movie Glory. I'm sure some of the historians here have probably seen it. And when I watched the movie Glory, I learned about the 54th Massachusetts, which was the first black regiment in the States. I subsequently learned that actually, technically, the 1st Kansas was the first, but they weren't recognized by the War Department at the time. And it's a wonderful movie. Everyone says it's the best Civil War movie. It's the movie that made Denzel Washington. He's amazing in it. Morgan Freeman's amazing in it. Matthew Broderick might be the only problem because he just seems like Ferris Bueller to me, no matter what he's in. But it's a wonderful movie. Definitely watch it. And it chronicles the Battle of Fort Wagner, which was the first battle that black soldiers fought in the Civil War. They failed, but they won the respect of all the Union soldiers. And from that point onwards, black soldiers were allowed to participate in battle. One thing that just fascinated me, I learned that there were black Canadians in this regiment, quite a lot of them. And I never heard of black Canadians fighting in the American Civil War. And when I did more research, it was just fascinating how this all happened. The governor of Massachusetts at the time, his name was John Andrew, and he was a staunch abolitionist, and he had a good friend by the name of Frederick Douglass. So once the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, he had Douglass start the regiment, and the first 2 enlistees were actually 2 of Douglass's sons. There was a problem though. There weren't that many black people in Massachusetts in the 1860s. So they canvassed across the northern states, which was frowned upon because each state had a quota because they wanted to raise their own colored regiments. And so what happened was they canvassed into Canada. And that's how a lot of black Canadians enlisted into the 54th Massachusetts, which historically had an outsized influence on American history. I mean, if it wasn't for them, black soldiers would not have received the modicum of recognition that they did receive from other Union soldiers, and definitely the white Union soldiers, because at the time, they were only seen as basically good for burial duty, building abatis and other structures that they built at the time. And of course, digging trenches and stuff. Sorry, I went on there.
Oh, no, it's absolutely fascinating. This is a poetry and history event, so thank you for sharing some of that.
I would just like to say, though, this is a poet's version. There's a huge poetic license that I've taken with this. You will fail your history test if you use my book to pass any history test. Okay, there's tremendous poetic license. And it occurred to me this would be the first reading I've ever attended where I can't fudge anything or just no embellishment because there are historians in attendance. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Many of us who are Underground Railroad descendants from southwestern Ontario, in fact, had family members who fought in the Civil War in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment and the companion regiment, the 55th, the 27th Michigan Infantry, and others. So, yeah, you'll find some of them buried in Windsor Grove, in fact. So I really wanted to ask you about some of the language that you use in your poetry collection, because there's quite a lot of very specific regional language and language that pertains to those times that you had to kind of wrap your head around. And in fact, you provide a glossary so that the reader can understand.
Yes.
How did you discover all of that and research it?
Well, just through the research and reading personal accounts. As a poet, as someone who just loves language and words and etymology, I started following the words, and eventually I ended up at Harvard, not physically in Harvard, but online with their Dictionary of American Regional English. And it was a treasure trove, along with a few other dictionaries. And yeah, it was, I remember the first time I encountered the word bumbershoot for umbrella. I fell out of my chair. I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then there were all these other words, and like words like play pretties for toys, which describes it perfectly. Seed folk for ancestors. How perfect is that? And my ultimate favorite, coffin nails for cigarettes. They call them coffins. So they knew 100 years before the Surgeon General of the U.S. that imbibing smoke into your lungs is not necessarily the healthiest thing. But no, the largesse of the lexicon, the vocabulary was just, it was like manna from the gods. And I couldn't wait to insert them and play with them and put them into poems. And I got too immersed in that because when the first publisher who approached it, after they said, this is illegible. And when I got it back and reviewed it, I said, oh yeah, they're right. Luckily, Luke Hathaway at Biblioasis had the vision to see the poems through all of my vocabulary, and Luke did quite a cutting. It was a bit of a massacre, but a good one. I liken it to a skilled sculptor with the block of stone and just chipping away and then unearthing the sculpture beneath. That's essentially what Luke did. Luke really made it sing by cutting a lot of the excess that I have.
Good editors are such a blessing. So I'm going to let you proceed with your reading. We're all looking forward to hearing your poems. Thank you, Michael. Please give a hand to Michael Fraser.
Sure. Literacy Arts Windsor, Essex County Black Historical Research Society, Chantel Browning Morgan, Irene Moore Davis, Dan Wells and everyone at Biblioasis, all the other poets and presenters, and everyone else in attendance. Just imagine, for the entire history of the universe, we were here and we shared time. And that means something, and it does every day. So thank you. Okay, because I'm in Windsor for the first time and I passed by Chatham for the first time, and a lot of these, the people I write about are actually from Chatham, so first three poems will be about people directly from Chatham. One, Henry Williams, he was 14 years old when he was tricked into fighting for the Union, And it was crazy back then. There was a whole system of bounties. They would pay people up front. And this is horse and buggy world. So some people soon learned that they could receive their money and then desert, show up in another jurisdiction, and get paid again. So it was crazy, and there was a lot of criminality. Henry Williams, 14 years old. They took me by the blind side, asked in for help loading stone boats. I cooned in decking logs, then set the tump line down, removing sliver spikes from my log-brushed hemshirt. One shiner and a redhead said into me, "Of course I can read," I says. And I revealed the Bible page he furnished, clear as the Lord had placed the words. His smile drummed the air and he produced poke bag paper, wanting to know if I could quill my name. Then they asked me again. Now suspicion bit into my idea pot. Their eyes glazed fire, brows heared up, insisting I had orders to follow. I was now soldier, bonded to march or face the coward's cage. Mama tried to stop the subterfuge devised against me, tried the charity of higher-ups who were too weak to lift my signature. We couldn't force time back up its hill or make the river return to its shy spring source. Whenever I glim my backstick past, I know that Wood Square moment was devilish, more engineering than blind chance. They whooped and trimmed me, chunked me with adult fists. One day, I'll snap back and rip them like a forked plothound. Okay, and the next two poems are about Thomas Arthur Brown and his wife. Thomas Arthur Brown was originally from Maryland, and then he escaped to Pennsylvania, where he actually worked in the Underground Railroad. So he saved many lives and brought many people to freedom. He married Frances Jane Scroggins Brown, and then they settled around Chatham. His one mistake was he was still a porter and working on the Mississippi Riverboat, and that was his undoing. Bought my freedom out of Maryland and hitched rails into the 9th concession fence in Chatham. Married my cupcake, Frances, and chunked Oakwood studs into a sweat-earned homestead. I river worked as a steamboat steward, fluking up and down Old Muddy, flung miles away from my woodlot tract. 2 graybeard pops called my kindness, left carpetbags in my care, and were ghost absent when the pig boat stepped away from St. Louis. Chuffing down Old Muddy as sunlight bathed and play sparkled along the free stretch Songline River. Union officers boarded at Memphis, gleaming for contraband. They unraveled the carpetbag cargo, and I gawked in amazement at the sight. I was minding Lucifer's snake snacks, percussion caps destined for the rebels. I was caught in a hard row of stumps, mined off, reaching water well deep, hauling words to explain I had been bootleg screened. Then snug chains landed on me, and I was whisked back to St. Louis with only work stitches. Now I shammocked back and forth, closed in by stone walls, thinking on my booted family, work brittle, and alone in Canaan. Okay, and now the poem for his wife. It was obviously very hard on people back home, especially those who went to fight for the Union. If they were Black American soldiers, they received money for their families, but Canadian soldiers did not. So it was a real undertaking. I card raw wool and think I see him abeam through the window. He walks the path upholding a black bumbershoot in this gully washer rain. I look again and only see the sky's draggy waterfall cutting the tag alders and stump fence from sight. My mind's at the end of its row. The mooing swoo lean one way against the freestall. I ribble off our saber's words, know he'll provide larder to fill the root house. I told my oldest he must deacon skills his father knows. The glim brightens this room, lets the daylight down and furnishes these brush arbor walls. I need to turn the bats into rovings and ready them for spinning. I know one day he'll leave the coop. I know he'll be delivered. Okay, I'm not sure how I am with time, but I will read one more poem, the poem that won the CBC Poetry Prize. Then I'll just share, I have a poem from my previous book, which is about the Underground Railroad, entitled Underground, and then one last poem. African Canadian in Union Blue. I was AWOL, an unpaid ridge runner, hawking distance from the coal-shaded 54th Massachusetts, pulling fleet-foot through night brush, my feet bramble-clawed and days sore, yowling for a pair of spendy cruisers. Bounty men near caught me in Tamarack Larch. I saw their smooth-bare guns, day clear, their eyes haired up and owly. I was hanging by my eyelids and angled a beam through light-blazed metal bomb, jumping log cob and bull stumps, moss-bitten rot-hole fallers, deploying all the natural speed my buck-bred seed folk gave me. I was base-born in Chatham, Mammy giving life to 6 pin baskets in a rickety pushcart. If I were to see him now, I'd ask Daddy why he healed off before eyeing me wrapped in scrapped yarn. His master named him John, echoing the New Testament. Whitney's cotton gin nearly snapped his sallow-brown back in half. Some days he bleated raw like a crushed, side-born calf, sliding away from full breath. Hurdy up and sky-rooted through Virginia pine faster than whiskey jacks whistling over feed camps, and sparked Mammy's teenage mind before stone-rolling to his novel life. A rail toad booming around rusted-aged jimmies and rag-shag Tunerville trolleys. I continued dim moon traveling west through puckerbrush, sedge, and prick-filled tanglewood, lodging with other lucked-out Negroes beside slick, calm Finger Lakes, hauling soaked rick to hemload tip carts. We'd light down to chew tough cow grease pone before snacking tobacco ropes, our smoky, tea-skinned, black bodies day-whipped and legged out. White clodhopper abolitionists and schoolmarms let me sleep on shakedowns and boil up my battered threads out back, stooped over hose bibs, rub boards, or mill ponds. A swamp Yankee and his Jake-leg wife, above Rochester, stodged up scrapple, fire-burnt tunk-up, and slack-salted Pope snows. We popped it down with overproof lamp oil, and everyone was all in, plowshine. My mind was so jag-skated, I talked all my clothes business like I was up a redwood tree. Can't extract when my head clunked the sold rag shuck bed. A night woke bed fast with scarlet runners beating my bare flesh, sweat runneled and rilled either side of my chest hill slopes. Heard hushed words and realized they were studying to mule me to cellars. Morning I pretended to smile along, then lit out crow quick past tumps and shadebark glades of knurled hickory. On the final night, I met bullhorn thunderheads, throwing froth-smeared gully washers and stump mover skies. I squinched and child-stivered through teeming chisley freshets that sozzled and gaffed me, the mud water pooling the path's apron. Almost done in, I saw America's back 40 sproutland, sun glimming and drying after the rains had sugared off. I went down the ravine scoop, smiling towards burlers and their floaty Niagara chuck boats, waiting to river cross into Canaan. I include a lot from Spanish countries and Portuguese, Brazil as well. Just 2 poems. Underground. They came like caged birds, railed out in bottoms of sunken wood crates, their nostrils pickled in sour stench coats. Summer's humid claws baked them weak, while crickets squeaked wings under slow-moving stars. Even near the border, they were always one cough away from the familiar clinking chain bracelet, the scalding half-tone whip, boiling bumps onto their backs like a firebrand fresh from blue hot fire. And when they crossed over into Ontario, the photograph showed it all. Africans knee-deep in a vomit of snow, a Halloween of lies while they listen to the frozen icicle notes crash one by one in the ice storm's wake. The strangled crunch of boots waiting for the full husk of winter to burst open. And in spring, they didn't know what to expect with the new crops and all. And when they dreamed of cotton, their screams shook the night air of its clothes, and their hearts raced alongside the cold, curdling voices running barefoot into morning. It's about the Black Panthers. Because Watts was burning, I dashed watch chains and grabbed dish rack sinks filled with the back-cutting weight of my enslaved ancestors and buried everything into store windows, blasting my hand-tied Jim Crow past all the covered-mouth rapes my mother's grandmothers endured, and flipped the Lord's shotgun back because I knew he couldn't exist. And then I let the safety click speak up in public. Because Watts was burning, I became Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, packing intellectual heat in mist-filled Oakland dawns, thrusting the Bay's glacial bylaws back at pearl faces perched on painted lady porches, their eyes coding me behind masks. I moved rocket fast and turned history, pounding the 60s when everything moved in Aussie and Harriet time. Because Watts was burning, I climbed out of the weathered underground, launching the pirate distaste of our soldiers felled in Vietnam, Korea, the gas-soaked trench lines that carved up Europe, returning to see fountains coupled with whites only outside theaters, or clinging bat-mad to hotel sides. I couldn't choose bus seats, but they let me appoint my tree and swung my brothers with hemp twine, swiveled their charred remains under Dixie suns, chasing night's blackened knees. I was half-time in boardrooms and law offices, doing the janitor's ragtime jig, soft shoeing across marble, venting song and seeing toothless laughs, my children walking coatless to winter schools minus books. Because Watts was burning, I knotted history's apron strings and linked up with Stokely Carmichael and Angela Davis to seal the hot spot beatdown on racism's fireside flush. We blared our jive plot points on our half-erased rasping story, how we remained horse-saddled in summer's cotton death fields, our sweat-sliced skin interred and spliced by color's flashpoints. We fly-kicked and cold-slapped cotton-hooded laws with upstart intensity. Because Watts was burning and turning charred brick back into black carbon, I rose to red glare, wailing alarm clocks, clipped the magnum to my side, and finally decided to wake the hell up. Thank you.
In the hands of my fellow historian, Kimberly Simmons. Kimberly Simmons is Vice President of the Essex County Black Historical Research Society and Executive Director of the Detroit River Project. And it seems an opportune time to recognize a few other people as Kimberly comes forward. I want to acknowledge the members of the Board of Literary Arts Windsor who are here. Could you please give a wave if you're on the Board of Literary Arts Windsor? There are a few of you. Thank you. And I want to recognize members of the board of the Essex County Black Historical Research Society who are here. Please wave if you are on the ECBHRS board. Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge Gail Carter, who's here with us today. Gail was very involved at the time when this monument was being put together and was extremely helpful in overseeing its construction from a community point of view, but also very helpful in the dedication event itself with the planning and organization and volunteer logistics. So I want to acknowledge Gail too. 21 years ago. And lastly, I just want to say Gemma Gray Hall was with us earlier. She had to leave, unfortunately, but I do want to express my gratitude that on such a busy weekend, 2 days ahead of our municipal election, Gemma Gray Hall was at the event and was hoping to say hello to all of you. So thank you, Gemma Gray Hall. I will now turn us over to Kimberly Simmons to add some historical context about this wonderful day that we're celebrating
today. We have a glorious day. 2 days ago, there was white stuff in the sky. We won't discuss that, even though my lovely secretary for the Essex County Black Historical Research Society said it would be a great day if we, had nice crisp, like what are you talking about? Anyway, I thank you for coming today to celebrate freedom with us. 21 years ago, and I was thinking 20, but 21 years ago, we were here celebrating freedom. And also 10 years ago, we were actually celebrating freedom. Well, 11. We did a symposium in 2011 to celebrate our monuments and to celebrate the story of freedom. Has anybody, well, I think maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but when you get up in the morning or when you go to sleep at night, have you ever considered what freedom means? I pose that question to everyone I speak to, be it kids, be it adults, wherever we are, because that story, the definition of freedom, is a personal one, and we all have one. We just never thought about it before. So I put forth before you today, as we stand here on a glorious 70-degree day, and the ancestors have looked down upon us and smiled, because 21 years ago, it was a day like this. And 11 years ago, it was a day like this. So, something in the air, something is happening. We are being smiled upon from above. What I would like for you to remember as my side job, my first job, of course, is Vice President of the Essex County Black Historical Research Society, but my second job is as Executive Director of the Detroit River Project. And I talk about freedom with many every day. Because as that young lady that stands on the monument facing the United States from whence she came, she's still considering, was this journey to freedom across that river the right thing that she did? So I put before all of you today, we must always remember from whence we came. Look back to look ahead. Look back to look ahead. Because we still are on that same journey. Freedom hasn't come. We may think it has, but freedom hasn't come. We still have a long way to go. And I put before all of us here, as we honor this monument, to keep freedom on the brain every day. Every day. It's a fight that isn't over. So as we celebrate our glorious monuments, and I had the opportunity 11 years ago, I felt like Morgan Freeman. Somebody brought up his name earlier. I had Ed Dwight for 3 days to myself. Well, not necessarily to myself during the symposium, but he rode shotgun for me for 3 days, and we visited all over, drove around. When he arrived in town in Detroit at the airport, he is one that has a lot of frequent flyer miles, therefore he got his own car, but I ended up being the chauffeur. Like I said, Morgan Freeman driving Miss Daisy. And the first place that he wanted to visit was his monument. And I will tell you, that day, that evening, was not like this. It was that misty, ugly, foggy rain. And we are driving down to the river, so we all know what that means. And I'm standing like this with an umbrella, because he had to come down and touch it and see what it looked like, because he hadn't seen it in a few years. So I say to you, it's still important to him, very much so. This monument means a lot to not just those of us that are descended of the story, but those that see it. It speaks to everybody. I've heard some of the stories that have come out of this. But remember, freedom has not happened yet. We're still got a ways to get there. So when you get up every morning, if you haven't thought about what is freedom, consider the definition, because you might be in front of Kim Simmons again and she might ask you that question. And people will tell you that I do. But I just want to put in just a little bit of sidebar to let you know, as the Detroit River Project Executive Director, we are working on a huge project, and that is World Heritage designation for our river, all 32 miles of it. And why? The story of freedom. The story of freedom, which is what we are all about here. So as we move ahead to 2027, which is tentative listing with the United Nations UNESCO arm, I want all of you to be attentive to that fact, because it will represent all of us, because this region is about freedom. But the core of that designation is going to be about what we're here today, the Underground Railroad. The beginning of the civil rights movement in the world, actually. It's recognized. So I leave you with those thoughts. What is freedom? So if I walk up to you on a street corner and I say, what is freedom? You'll have an answer. And I bet you it would take you a while to come up with it. But I'm going to leave that back over to our president. I thank you all for coming. This has been a 20-year journey that isn't over yet. So we'll celebrate in another 10 years. How about that, Irene?
But we have a wonderful opportunity to meet the author after this event, and certainly to fellowship with one another. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you once again to our sponsors. Thank you to Literary Arts Windsor and the Essex County Black Historical Research Society. Thank you to Creator for this beautiful day, and I wish you safe travels wherever you are going next. Take care.